On this episode of Ask Christian Counseling Associates, we talk with Dr. Jim Matta of Geneva College and CCA counselor Mark Britton. Join us as we explore challenges that teens face in the modern culture and the growing conversation around neurodiversity from a Christian counseling perspective. Welcome, guys. Thanks for being here. I have with me today Dr. James Matta, professor of counseling at Geneva College, alumni of Duquesne University, and a national counseling leader and clinical educator and advocate. And Mark Britton, counselor at CCA. And you are in our, I don't want to get this wrong, Mercer and
Grove City and Newcastle.
Okay. So you cover a lot of the region for us over in, that would be Mercer, and that's the Mercer region.
In Lawrence County, yeah.
Yeah. So Dr. Matta and Mark, welcome.
Well,
great to have you here.
Thanks for asking us.
Let me go to you, Dr. Matta, and just
sure.
If you could tell the folks more about you and being here for the first time on the podcast.
Sure. So probably what's the most relevant is that I've been in the mental health field now. I'm in my 40th year, right? Started out, I had a master's degree in clinical psych, went off into outpatient counseling. It's really my first love. Did that for any number of years, ended up in Beaver County at Family Services of Beaver County and Butler County for a period of time, and then shifted over to Western Psychiatric Institute and Clinic in 1990 with services for teens at risk. And there my expertise was in assessment, diagnosis, and then later on treatment intervention in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing. And was there up until around 2008, and then I departed. I spent a couple of years at the University of California in the Wellness Center. I was a faculty member there, but I saw my focus was on seeing students. And then in 2010, I shifted over to Geneva College because I wanted to teach. And so I was the coordinator for the school counseling track initially for a couple of years. And then my background is clinical mental health in terms of that, with all the training at Western Psych. And so I've been there for the last 15 years and just completed that. Also, probably what's relevant is that I was 2008, I was appointed by the governor to the licensing board of social workers, marriage family therapists, and professional counselors, and was there for 10 years and ended up chairing the board for a period of time. And then got elected president of the American Association of State Counseling Board for a 3-year stint and finished that off in 2020. And so I have a lot of regulatory background also, but I have a lot of family background, couples background, because I did any number of I had a number of opportunities where I worked at the Christian Counseling Collaborative as a therapist, and also I had a period of time in Monroeville where I did private practice under Christian counseling also. Very good.
Yeah, you're in it for that period of time.
Yeah,
you get to see and do a lot of stuff.
That's true.
And so you've definitely, this has been a journey. All these years. And when I was looking at your biography on the Geneva site, it mentioned that you were in the Duquesne program, graduating 2004.
Correct.
I was in that same program, graduating 2006. So we probably never saw each other there.
Probably passed each other on campus, not going in different directions.
Yeah. So, but I share that experience with you, that way. And it's interesting, definitely a focus on working with students, and so youth would be something that teenagers, what they are facing in the culture. I'm sure you've seen a lot of that, and it did note that you were one of just a couple of people as a licensed counselor to sit on the board and chair the board. I don't know which one, but evidently there's not a lot of licensed counselors who get that opportunity.
Yeah, there's so it's a board in terms of professionals, social workers, marriage, family therapists, professional counselors. It's a board made up by 10, so there's always 5 social workers, although those seats may not always be filled. Okay. And then there's 2 marriage and family therapists, 2 professional counselors, and then there's a swing seat that goes back and forth. So I was the second president of or chair of the board, from my understanding, in terms of for that particular licensing board.
Okay.
So yeah, I wasn't the first, but I was the second.
Okay, so you've been a professor at Geneva College for 15 years.
I'm the program director right now.
And we've had David Collins on the program.
Yeah.
He's a professor over there,
absolutely.
and
Colleague of mine.
Regional coordinator for us, has been here for a long time. So we love Geneva, and I've been over there to do guest appearances and things. In the past 10 years, and just a great place.
Super.
But Mark, you're an alumni of Geneva.
Yes.
And recently graduated.
Graduated December 14th, 2024.
Okay.
After I started there in 2022 at 51 years old.
Okay. So non-traditional student.
Definitely non-traditional.
But tell the folks a little bit more about your background and what gets you into Christian counseling. Your perspective.
Interesting. I when I refer to myself, and I'm describing my background to people, I will say this: I did not grow up with a Bible in my hand. So I've lived a life where I was chasing a lot of the wrong things most of my life. Yeah. And I went to high school in Seneca Valley, and I was in ROTC seeking some structure and leadership because I didn't have that in my own family, right? And so I went on to college at Penn State for engineering, and I graduated in May of 1994, and I was just thankful to have a bachelor's degree, honestly, and I worked in engineering for 20 years, but I wasn't happy, and I think it took a period of time where I pivoted, and there was some impactful moments in my life.
You said you worked in engineering. Is that
20
for 20 years? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But I do experience something that if there's one profession that people come into counseling with, like mid-career, it seems to be engineering or, computer engineering especially. I don't know why. But any insight on that? You said
it's funny. I take back my personal experiences, right? A lot of my experiences that I didn't think were really valuable, but when I look at what I've been through now today, and I look back at that, I have a lot to offer from those experiences because of the changes in my life.
Sure.
But when I went into seeking counseling as a master's degree from Geneva, I had this interview with someone from Geneva College. It was Dr. Matta. And he was identifying how those could be used as strengths.
Sure.
And I wasn't aware that I could use the things that I saw in my life as, almost like potholes, right, in my life, things that I've had to overcome. And I could see those as strengths to be used in the counseling process today.
That's a great observation, that you don't have to have a perfect background. And many people have troubled backgrounds coming into give their lives to the profession of counseling. And so, I'm sure that there's a lot of people who could relate. So troubled as a youth.
Well, and that's only the tip of the iceberg. I grew up in a household where addiction had run rampant. My mother had her addiction, my father had his, and it impacted me. It impacted me directly, and the whole genetics, right? I come from a long line of alcoholics, and addiction is just common in my family.
So you sort of observed that there was a susceptibility there that was generational.
Yes. And it was the environment where it was it was very easy to obtain, to use, and to get away with it. As a adolescent and a young teen, growing up in that environment, I was one of those latchkey kids. Parents weren't around. I had to let myself in and out of the house, and began, in order to seek relationships with others, I looked outside of the home to other people and work. And I started working at a young age.
How old were you?
I was 12 when I got my first job. I worked in a restaurant as a dishwasher. And then I went to work for an Italian grocery store. What
store was that?
Well, it's Viola's in Cranberry. And it was interesting working with the mafia.
Okay.
That's how I intimately refer to it, because it was an Italian family, and it was, I felt comfortable being accepted there.
Yeah. Yeah, but definitely, gaining a lot of street experience and a lot of unique perspective as being, not having your parents around. And getting involved in things at an early age.
And then I got a car. Yeah. And once I had a car, I could get down to the North Hills and get in more trouble.
Your world opens up.
Right.
Yeah, so that's interesting. A lot of like personal experience, and that's part of your counseling approach is bringing that kind of insight into things. And Dr. Matta, you got a Lifetime Achievement Award in counseling.
Yes.
Is that from the Pennsylvania Counseling Association?
Pennsylvania Counseling Association.
And so, that's interesting, to be recognized like that. But definitely, Tell us more about that. Like, what happened that they recognize you?
So really it goes back to my days. You had mentioned Duquesne, right? So I got my doctorate from there. But while in the doctoral program, a couple of fellow students, we put in a proposal at the PCA, and it got accepted. And I spent a lot of time, doing some of those conferences. And then I had a buddy who became president, and he needed a treasurer. And I was trying to tell my buddy Sean, I can't balance my checkbook. You want me to? And he's like, no, we got it all figured out. And somebody had spent time with it. And so one thing led to another, right? And so I got a lot of background there. And then I've had a lot of visibility for a variety of different reasons, whether it be the serving on the licensing board or the regulatory world or whatever along that line. And I was the first one. I don't like tooting my horn, but I was the first one individual from Pennsylvania to be the president of the American Association of State Counseling boards. And then it's just pieces like that in terms of it got to a point where I had a colleague nominate me. And so it was many years in terms of me building on that, but eventually that's where it kind of came about.
You build these relationships, you become well known, and your work becomes well known, and you get recognized.
Yes.
And there's a common thread here that I want to talk about, which is your work at is it Western Psych,
yes.
and that involves students, youth, and get your insights on seeing things at a different level. But before I do that, there's another part that people really don't get to hear about, and I think it's more of like a professional interest.
Sure.
Is that licensing board?
Yeah.
I've had a lot of incidental interactions, as we do like a lot of licensure applications,
Right.
And I don't know if this is just opinion, but I've heard it said that Pennsylvania is one of the most difficult licensing states in the country. It's not just counseling; it's all licensure. So I wonder what it's like from your perspective to sort of watch that and deal with that. As we're in 5 states, so we experience and really, like, Pennsylvania and New York are a whole different ballgame than Ohio and like other places.
Right. Well, I would even say New York is at times even more difficult, more challenging. But the thing with Pennsylvania is that I think we were the 47th state to be licensed. So there are 50 states in the District of Columbia, so there are 51. So we were the 47th, and we really had to. And my brother was. My older brother, Tom, was at the forefront of really help bringing this along in terms of the licensure, the Act 136. It's called Act 136. The General Assembly passed in 1998. And so, that whole piece coming into play, there were social workers were licensed 10 years prior to us. And so the board initially was made up by 10 social workers. But the governor, Tom Ridge, at the time, had decided he didn't want a separate board for professional counselors, marriage and family therapists. So he just brought us all together, and they only gave them 5 social worker seats, and then you have 2 in terms of 2 professional counselors, 2 marriage and family therapists, and there's a swing seat. I say all that because it is there is an aspect of this that's been hard to, like, we were late to the game. I don't even think the first licenses were issued until 2002, 2003. So we're pretty young in terms of the licensing board. But also, I think that when you look at how the licensing board grew over time, I think there were a lot more resources back in the day. I think they try to do things where they're very cost conscious, which strings. This is my own opinion. I don't represent the board. I'm not talking for the board or anybody else.
It's just your personal opinion.
This is just my personal opinion. And I just need
There's
to be
some disclaimer I want to say right here.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I got to make sure I stay in my lane and I don't mislead people. And so, like with that aspect, it's a slow process. And I think that the turnaround time on the applications, Pennsylvania, when I was on the board, it took a very staunch position that it wanted to make sure that others who had been licensed, that the people who came after them were held to the same regulations and the same challenges, right? And so I think there's that aspect of making sure people do it. Now, at one point in time, the licensing board required from the licensees 3,600 hours. And so there was at one point in time, we were much more difficult. And then we dropped it down to 3,000. And this is one aspect very favorable to the board, where they wanted to make it as close to the overall average that's required around the states, which was really around 3,000 hours. And so they brought it back. They reeled that back in. So, I think some of that's there, but it can be challenging at times. It can be a lot of waiting around.
Well, I probably, I try to think about just the general public, like what they think about this and what's interesting to them, because there's a lot of minutia and bureaucracy. So there was a recent, I forget the name of the place, but it's where when you retire, you have a paper file. I never knew this, and I'm not speaking with any kind of authority on this. It's just sort of background information to me, but there's a place near Pittsburgh where they drive your record underground and they store it, and it's where all the records go. It just happens to be in Western PA. One of our counselors was telling me the name of it because she lives near it. But
sounds like Iron Mountain.
It's Iron Mountain. That's it.
So that on 22.
So you know about that, but evidently, when you retire, it takes all this time to actually get that retirement, and people really, it's a problem. Really, people don't like it, but it's part of it is because we're still driving these paper files into this Iron Mountain and storing them there. So, in the modern era, where you can just email something in a second, and So I've seen that. I was very glad that we got licensure. I was grandfathered in. I was at the beginning of it, and advocated for it. And I've always sort of seen people sort of get crushing blows at the beginning of that as they wait 6 months, or we've seen counselors not even understand how to get through it. And here we assist people professionally and help them. We don't have to, but just to do it as part of the perks of CCA. But without that, people would be all over the place. So, and now, for somebody who's been around a long time, seen all these things, we're going to see the compact come through. And I've heard a lot of different things. What's your opinion on that? Why is that happening now?
Sure.
Because what I see counselors always do is that's for me. Right. This is going to be great, and it's going to serve the public. And I don't know if I've really seen that. When forces move through the mental health system, why they happen. But now, you have this thing where you'll be able to get licensed in any state real quick.
I'm very familiar with the Interstate Compact. Matter of fact, when I was president-elect of the American State Association Counseling Board, Angela McDonald, who was the president at the time, led that charge. I was with her. We went down to the Capitol and met with at the state systems board or something. And she was really the person who got this off the ground. And so basically what the Interstate Compact is that if we as counselors are moving from one state to another, it becomes very challenging. I've had people tell me that one person was going from Colorado to Arizona. It took her 2 years to have that transition to for them to be given a license in Arizona. And so there are all these obstacles, right? And I also think that COVID had a lot to play with this too, that really facilitated the process, because we had a lot of people that needed services, and if they were across the line, it created a lot of obstacles for those who were licensed to be able to see them, and so a lot of things come into play basically to allow. I think there are over 30 now. States that have signed on. Is it 37?
37.
I'm hoping Pennsylvania becomes one of them soon, but we have a history of waiting to see what everybody else does, see how it works out, and then we'll go then, make a decision. But that whole aspect of being able to be able to move around, take where I live in Beaver Falls. So I'm literally 20 minutes, 30 minutes away from West Virginia. I'm 20, 30 minutes away from Ohio. And if those places are a part of the Interstate Compact, I have the ability to be able to serve like that. And if you look at Pennsylvania, you look at Philadelphia, where's all the population? Down in the southwest corner. You look at Pittsburgh, it's down in the southwestern population. If you look at Erie, it's up at the northern western. And so our populations are very much close to other states. And so that really gives us the ability to be able to serve others in and around us. And, are there some downsides? Could be. But I'm kind of a proponent of it, because we make things so hard, and we can see at times where, some of this also, I should say, the Department of Defense is involved in this, right? Part of that is because 22% of the spouses of military personnel are licensed individuals. That's what I heard from them, the Department of Defense, who came to these meetings with us when we were meeting down in Washington, D.C. And they very much on board with that, trying to make sure that those who are serving in the military, their families are being taken care of, because very often they move around. That's another, I don't know how much of a primary factor that is, but that's another variable involved in this that really had a lot of sway in this.
Mark, do you have any opinions on Compact? Or so we're sort of geeking out here on the counseling side. I feel we're going to push on.
I love this, and so from a counseling compact standpoint, I have several clients or people that were interested in having counseling done that were members of family members, right? They were family members living across the line in Ohio, right? I couldn't counsel them, right, because of where they are located in their home state. So that was a referral to someone else who is licensed within their home state. And I do know from some of the research that I've done recently that Pennsylvania has had recently, I think it was March 2025, put in a directive that they're looking to join. They haven't yet, but I'm kind of watching it.
Yeah, Pennsylvania always seems, again, like we talked about it, to be behind. But, I tend to, because we were, in the last episode, we were talking about AI and how that's getting involved in counseling. And the strange thing that happens is counselors be like, oh, it's here to help us. And I'm like, come on. And really, when changes are made, what we see evolving, through the COVID years is online counseling and the marketing of that. And it's not individual counselors. I mean, the counselors have gotten into that and seeing it as an opportunity, but big companies, and health insurance companies. And so Highmark is going to launch its own online system to basically save themselves money from outsourcing to counselors in practice. And they're going to offer an online platform, predominantly, and they're going to be able to control it. And then you have conglomerates like BetterHelp, Grow, all these places that are making, I don't know, $1 billion a year. They're not clinicians, and they're not focused on providing clinical quality. And, I often see, the amount of effort and power that it takes to shift something in a bureaucracy does not come from our counseling organizations or counselors. As I remember once, I was calling the PCA and I was mad about Medicaid supervision. And again, I'm geeking out on this, but the psychologists were said that they could oversee trainees. And then there was a general rule that everybody could do it, but they cut off the social workers and the counselors. And I was calling, my state, and they said, or the PCA, and I don't know who I was talking to. I was talking to somebody who was a leader, and they said, we would need $1,500 to go after that. And I got off the phone. He wasn't asking me for $1,500 because at that time, even at CCA, we would have sponsored that. He just said he's not doing it. Which I thought, wow, if we could get this done for $1,500, are you kidding me? But really, that person was not allowing themselves to go to that level of commitment. So I think of something as big as the compact and, the amount of attention and the money that will be spent on that. It's not coming from the counselors or to benefit the counseling. That's
money's coming from, to be honest with you, the money came from the American Counseling Association. They ponied up the money. Most of the organizations don't have the kind of money that was needed to do that. And as a matter of fact, with the AI stuff, when you look at the American Counseling Association, you look at the American Association of State Counseling Boards, and you look at the National Board of Certified Counselors, believe me, AI is on their radar, and they are very, very concerned with some of the movement. And I think Gerald Lawson, who is the current president of the American Association of State Counseling Boards, we had him come in for one of our ethics classes, virtually. And he was saying that's a major movement right now for those organizations because some of the things that are happening are really very concerning, to say the least. And it's going to be problematic.
Yeah,
it's going to be problematic.
Yeah, so I think professionally, it gets into speculation. I don't have any hard facts on things like the compact. I love to talk about it, though.
Sure.
So we were talking about AI this time. It's interesting that you've been involved in movements, and okay. So getting back to this study, because working at Western Psych, it's a huge influential organization, and so they run clinical studies. that are very quality, and you actually get good information about that.
Yeah.
But that was a study that maybe you could tell us more about the study on troubled youth and your involvement in it, and we can talk about that a little bit more.
Well, just looking at adolescents, right, in the last couple of decades, there's been a lot of issues surrounding their well-being on so many different fronts, right? So when you're looking at that, there's right now what's called the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, which is the largest study ever conducted in the U.S., and it's longitudinal, and it started back in 2015. It's going to be running for a period, but we're going to understand more about the adolescent brain than previously. Like, unbelievable amounts of information. We're probably rewriting the textbooks as a result of this. So it's 21 different sites, and we're really talking about adolescence, right? So we've seen the spike in depression. We've seen the spike in anxiety. We know social media is playing into some of that. There's a lot of pressure with how adolescents are responding to a lot of that. We also know that when it comes to depression, adolescents are underdiagnosed and they're undertreated, right? Part of that is I don't think that professionals and family members recognize that irritability is a symptom of depression for them. It's not a symptom in terms of being counted for adults, but anybody under the age of 18, irritability is there. And on average, when we're looking at individuals who have a depressive episode, left untreated, it's about 9 months, right? Doesn't mean others can't experience it way more, doesn't mean way less, but on average, it's 9 months. And when you think about children and adolescents, which makes up almost a quarter of the population in the United States, we're talking about a very large population that often there isn't a lot of data on. We base a lot of our treatment interventions on adolescents in terms of adult models, but we're getting a better understanding. But I would say that when you're looking at adolescents, there's a section there that we need to pay more attention to.
So one of the key parts of the study was irritability is pointing to depression, and you cite a fact that's well known but not talked about a lot is that depression runs its course, usually ends on its own if you don't do anything at all. But if that course is about 9 months to a year, that's a big chunk of a kid's life. And a study like that would identify irritability. Now, coming back to you, Mark, and talking about just being in trouble. Your perspective, I would guess, is different. You're not telling yourself, well, I had a problem with irritability.
Right.
If you were to say, like, from my point, like, and this isn't any study, this is a case study, what would be, in your experience in seeing students all throughout your career, like who get depressed as an adolescent, what are the things that you've seen that have been really important?
Christian Counseling Associates is ready to serve you, providing a wide range of counseling services. Christian counseling is accessible to everyone. We serve both Christians who want their faith integrated into the counseling process, or those holding any beliefs or attitudes toward spirituality. With many years of counseling experience, our counselors are professional, licensed, highly trained, and rooted in their commitment to their church and communities. CCA is able to provide a full range of clinical counseling services. For more information, visit our website at www.ccawpa.com.
Well, let me first say that my bias and it comes from my own personal experiences and my professional experiences that I've seen to date. And I'm relatively new in that I'm just recently a licensed associate professional counselor now. Yeah. All right, the LAPC. And I think that my personal experience with that depression and as an adolescent, I take it back to when I was growing up, right? What was going on in my life, in my family, in the household, and how I can relate to that. And I saw in my life that I was, right, looking back on it now, that I was really depressed. And
so you could relate to that kind of study.
Right. And I was first introduced to counseling, back in 5th or 6th grade, when my parents were having domestic violence issues, and they were seeking a divorce. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning, right? That introduction where I had to, at school, see a counselor who came to see me. And believe it or not, that counselor is not in the working in the counseling arena anymore. He's now in a legal aspect in the county government. But it's interesting. I look back to that counselor and my interactions with him and the guidance that I've received through that counseling process, which to me was really difficult to be in counseling, as a young teen. And so as an adolescent myself, having gone through that, it's important to me to reach those adolescents today professionally. And I see the irritability in youth. I also see the depression and the anxiety. Seems to be a lot of anxiety that's coming out. Now, I mentioned earlier about addiction in my own personal life. I'm seeing a lot of youth who have more process addictions that tie into this. The addiction to screens, phones, gaming systems, computers, laptops. And you think about what happened prior to COVID and during COVID, and now what we're seeing, and this is from my, I'll say, adjustment and evaluation of the adolescents that I've seen, is a consistency across the board, that they all have that one common thread, which is being addicted to their screens and that social media.
Yeah, so you have like trends like that, and I think anybody who's looking at that is coming back with some pretty stark data that the screens are not good for the kids. And everybody knows it, but we're sort of going down that path. And you mentioned another, your parents, they had problems, and they were fighting, and you were pretty much on your own. So that's another, out of these studies, I always look for a credible source of data on how many kids are growing up in families that don't have a mom and a dad. Well, they have one or the other, or maybe they don't have either. Would you be able to venture? I don't want to, the statistic I'm coming up with, and it seems quite high, is that 25.1% live with a single parent. So that would be about 1 in 4.
Yeah.
And that being said, I would say historically, I've looked at the trends. I don't have anything prepared off the top of my head, but those trends are as high as they've ever been in this country. And so you have like these studies that would show symptoms, but we would often cite the general meta-analysis of the sociological studies, which sometimes they don't get brought into the counseling, but there's these 3 factors. They're correlational research that will, as this goes up, as far as having a mother and father in the house, having a mother and a father who is going to give you adequate parental supervision, which means they're dealing with things. And then the third one is that the household has a high value on education. Those 3 factors, as that goes up, lifetime earnings are going up, health factors are going up, things like incarceration rates are going down, and life expectancy is going up. And then so those correlations are quite clear. And
Rich, can I give you a personal application to that?
Yeah.
And so, like, here I was, right? I was working as doing a little paper job, right? Paper boy back in 1982. And as I was delivering the papers, right, and looking at the houses and going around collecting at night, parents weren't home for dinner. And so, as a matter of fact, I'm looking into the houses, riding my bike, going up to each door, and I can see the light inside the house at the table, and the family's eating dinner. And that's the time I knew to collect, because they were all home.
yeah.
Now, I'm talking about like 11 years old, 12 years old. I'm going around and doing this. I became very, how do I say it, angry as a kid.
It's upsetting.
Seeing families together,
It reminds
like
you that you don't
intact
have that.
families.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's I think of how that impacted me, but also looking at the conduct disorder, right? Like of my own conduct. I made choices and decisions as a young teen that were seeking attention and affection from others because I wasn't getting it, right? And so, having been in that situation, I was looking for something that I didn't have because my own needs weren't met. And how many kids, adolescents are not, their needs aren't being met within their own family.
And just a personal side on this, Mark. I just find it interesting. I delivered the Post-Gazette as a kid, so I was out there at I don't know if I was 12 or 11 or 10, but I just remember, one of my favorite memories. It's not a good memory, but it's the postmaster, the paper route guy, would come and be like, "Where's the money?" And if you didn't rip off this little thing and give it to them,
the tab,
but wow. And I always just thought, there was people out there, and I got the paper later as an adult. They'd give you an envelope, and I was always trying to catch them, knock them on the door, get them while they're there. And it was very difficult to get some of those people to pay, and I was invariably short, but. I can relate to what you're saying. My parents were divorced when I was in kindergarten, and I had a way of getting around my dad because he wanted to parent me, and I wanted to be on my own. And it was easy to get around my mom, who I was living with. And that was one of my things is I was earning money, and I was spending that on bad stuff. So I'd be, but it was. Just in general, though, that paper route it was really neat time to be out in the morning and see.
So I have a mentor named Dr. Duncan Clark, and he ends up at the Pittsburgh Adolescent Clinical Research Center. And I had an opportunity to ask him one time what he felt like was the biggest risk factor for adolescents developing substance use disorder. And without hesitation, he said, parental guidance, parental supervision.
So
and I really think that's the thread that I think all of us can see in our lives. In terms of with how the family has changed over the course of time.
Yeah. So I think of some of those studies, what studies stress. And you try to review as much research as you can. And again, Western Psych is probably at the top of the game at that, because what it takes to conduct public studies and get funding for that, it's a real top-notch organization. So you saw that. But, it does come down to things that are harder to prove or don't want to be proven, like parental supervision. Not like we have the problem of helicopter parents who want to smother their kids nowadays. It's more of a presence and a systematic kind of involvement. That's a good word.
That engaged with with their child,
monitoring and supervision,
and Mark, your experience means a lot. Hopefully to the folks, because you had a chance to be independent, and at 12 years old, not good. And so we have these programs. We have Extraordinary Marriage and Extraordinary Parenting, and then we're launching Extraordinary Sexual Wholeness. And they're popular within the church sometimes. We're doing a lot of promoting. In the 27, 28 years that I've been doing this, not really popular as like something we're pursuing clinically all the time, in organizations that I've been in previously. So it's just one of those things, but it does seem like it's common sense. And when you think about troubled teenagers, that's a big factor as parents.
Yeah.
Rich, I think it's important, and I appreciate that you hear my personal experience, right, as an application to this. But I'm pretty passionate about being vulnerable and transparent, right? And initially, when I got into going to Geneva and doing research as part of my studies and looking into counseling, I think the adolescent part was not really in my target focus, to be honest. And I definitely, at that time, did not really want to associate with or even research anything having to do with older adults. Dare I say, older adults, and I am one, right, in my own opinion.
It sneaks up on you.
Right, it does. It does, right? And so, today at 53, I'm looking back on my life, and I can reflect onto those things. And having this experience, I'm working professionally, right? I'm looking at my personal experience and professional, and I can say that my research and target focus was incarcerated individuals. And it's interesting that how does an adolescent, right, with their behaviors and their choices that they're making and situations that they're in, become addicted, and as we talk about the substance use, even more so addicted to other addictions like pornography, right? Gambling.
Yeah, you used to be
process
worried about
addictions,
drugs and alcohol,
right?
But now it's like so much more that you can
Absolutely.
get caught up in. And definitely that leads to being in trouble,
right?
Being
and
in
in my
jail.
experiences, I've saw a connection between what was more like oppositional defiance as a young adolescent to eventually getting into like conduct issues, right? And
breaking the rules and norms of society.
Correct. And I had a chance after engineering. I went into drug and alcohol treatment, right? And I was working as a bachelor's level clinician doing drug and alcohol counseling, and then got into.
How long have you been in that before?
I was in that for 8 years.
Okay.
8 years at various inpatient, outpatient, and medical assisted treatment.
And what were you seeing in
settings.
there, Mark? During your time. I mean, that's all. You're an expert at drug and alcohol rehabilitation.
So a lot of that, I think, still stems. And again, my focus was on men, not looking at females in that substance abuse arena, but really seeing the culture of a male who was influenced by their parents, right, and growing up, and their relatives, the siblings and aunts and uncles with addiction. And so I did see a strong genetic and social environment influence on that. And so for me, family therapy became a significant interest. And having been personally never gone through family therapy, my own counseling was not as a family. We didn't sit down together and go to a counselor.
Yeah.
Dad didn't lead this. Mom didn't encourage it. And then later on, I did get into counseling on my own, but not until I was an older, an adult with children and had made additional, I'll say,
counseling
mistakes.
for yourself.
Yeah, for myself.
Because I'd like to say, and this is, it's profound, because it sounds like you had some very important reasons to be in counseling with your family. But I think it's a common dream for counselors to be in family counseling. I don't know, Jim, what you think about that. But
I think earlier in my life, I would say absolutely. I think later in my life, not so much now, right? I have 4 kids, they're gone. I have a wonderful relationship with my wife. And I think a lot of those hurdles are, for me, being in my mid-60s now, those stages aren't as challenging. And I've been able to iron out a lot of the wrinkles. But I think probably at one point in time, all of that can be helpful to have somebody assist you to look through a different lens about what's going on.
I have an experience because I was at Duquesne with Dr. Hanna. I don't know if you remember him.
Yes, I do.
He was my my direct reporter, whatever we would call that, and I just having trouble with some of my parents. I love my parents; they're great, but my mom's the only person living now. But I wanted to go get them all together. We're going to do this family therapy thing. We're going to figure this out. And Dr. Hanna said, "You know what, Rich? That opportunity is past. It's really not advisable now." And I remember being just ultimately disappointed, in that.
He did do some reparation stuff though.
Oh yeah.
Remember, I don't know whether you participated with him, but he used to hold this one-day workshop for fathers. And focusing on fathers and developing a relationship and going back. And some of that was we're doing repair work.
Well, back then you had a cognate, and I was with him because I was doing the cognate in marriage and family therapy, and he was an expert doing all that kind of stuff. And so I was sort of shocked, at that. But again, just touching upon, I think a lot of people get this, sense of importance of having a strong family and this wish to go back and correct that if you could. And Mark, that's what I hear in you. I share
Absolutely.
that.
Listen, in terms of my family, and I feel like there's been so many layers of disconnected relationships within my own family. I grew up without a grandparent. That is not common. Right, especially today with our generations being shorter together.
Yeah, what happened with your grandparents?
Well, my father was born in 1936, so his mom and dad. He was the youngest of 9, and so his mom and dad were born in 1902, 1905, I think, and so they were deceased before I was born. And interesting enough, my father died in 1997, and my own son, my firstborn, was born in 1999. So he grew up, and my other 2 children grew up without grandparents, just like I. And so I've always had this internal desire for family and connectedness and relationships. And so I think that has been a long-standing, heartfelt, desire of mine to connect with other people. And I've experienced that here at CCA with some of the counseling supervisors I've had and the colleagues that I built relationships with. But even through my own counseling process, personally, and into my professional career now, I'm seeing that there is a deep desire for people to be in relationship. But the disconnect, right? The things that create the disconnect, what drives the disconnect between a father and a child, right? A mother and a child. And there are various things going on within the family system.
Yeah. There's a lot to look at there. And so that is a big theme in troubled youth. And again, just getting back to just all the things I guess that we have seen. Any other big factors that you just like put out there to say like, hey, look, we got to watch out for this one? I think we talked about the the modern one of screen use. Your teen might be irritable. That's a definite sign.
Sleep. I don't think people realize just how critical sleep is. And so, a lot of times we're looking at the ABCD study is doing a lot of work on looking at adolescent sleep patterns and young adult sleep patterns and the problematic aspects of that. Like I think from 8 to 12, individuals should have 9 to 12 hours of sleep. They're getting under 8. You get into high school students, college students, a lot of issues with sleep, right? When we can't be focused, we can't kind of pay attention to aspects. There was a study done in 2006, which I always marvel at. It was done by a guy named Dr. Torek out of the University of Chicago. And one of the things that talking about depression, one of the things he noticed was that with his study, and I don't know whether this was ever replicated, I would like to know that, but what he found, that out of the 9 different symptoms of depression that can be manifested, that sleep was the first one. And sleep sometimes shows up 2 to 3 months prior to the depressive mood or the sad blue mood or the down mood or whatever. And I don't think we fully realize just how much sleep plays a role. So, for parents and other caregivers out there, and they're working with children, that sleep pattern is really, really important, and making sure they have enough sleep, making sure that you're tracking that. I think even for like counselors, right, psychotherapists, therapists, when we were working with clients and they're having sleep problems, we need to attend to those. We need to pay attention to those.
For sure.
And we have to make sure that we're tracking that. A lot of times sleep hygiene can be, how often do we do, like for people to do what we do? We're constantly engaged in talk about sleep. But I think also recognizing how important it is and can be a risk factor for mood issues. I don't think we pay enough attention to that. And so I think, that's a critical aspect. Nowadays with social media playing into screen use and everything along that line, it's funny how all it kind of ties in together.
Well, I look at society in the modern world and, great advantages, but one that's not, sleep's a big factor, I would agree. You can very easily see, that you're not getting enough sleep, but you live in a 24/7 society. If you take that back 3 generations, or maybe 4, so not too long of a time ago, but a long time to us, we weren't there. But when the sun went down, there was nothing more to do. You didn't even have lights, and you see like we go to third world countries where there's no infrastructure, and you can still see that like when the sun goes down, that day is over.
Yeah.
And you just go to sleep. And you get up with the sun, and it's very much easier to realize, there's this natural rhythm to things that if you get with that, it's very hard to do that nowadays.
I think parents and caregivers need to pay attention to the social media, the screen use, having kids sleep with their phones, right? There are different aspects now that we really need to be more involved with, making sure that that we're protecting them in that way. And we don't often think along that line because half the times, if not more, we're sleeping with our phones. That kind of aspect has become so prevalent in our society. I don't think we pay enough attention to that. And I think that's a good area for us to revisit in terms with younger children, and that making sure that we have some good boundaries set in terms of screen use time, sleep patterns, nutrition, some of the fundamentals. And I think the way that we were talking earlier, especially with Mark about, family time, having that aspect of making sure that we're spending time with one another. It's
Absolutely.
so easy to be so overly, engaged with stuff, and that's not the word I'm looking for. Activities, right?
Not in tune.
It's hard.
With your child.
It's very hard to manage all
Right.
these things anymore. But I think that the time given to that is going to be helpful for caregivers.
Yeah, so one of the things that we get down to talking about are some very clear things. They're very simple, look for irritability, look for sleep problems. There are these factors in your family. If you have them, you're strengthening. If you don't, there's a problem. There's concern, and despite that, I think in general, like what we see in this profession, are people are confused on the right direction to go, and it is just part of the culture. I don't know if I can explain it or if you have, but there's this study or not a study, but it's a trend, I guess. So there was this article that appeared in Psychology Today, why your quirks are your superpowers. And psychologist Barry Luptkin is emphasizing that quirks distinguish individuals, making them feel special and unique. So he's definitely not saying that these are pathological, but if you have, some quirks, you should celebrate them. And it gets at, I guess, to me, it gets at this larger theme, which is the neurodiversity theme. When I take a look at this theme, and it's sort of saying that, people are going to label you, people are going to say that this is pathological, but maybe you were just different.
Yeah.
And that should be respected and prized. And that's the solution. And so, this neurodiversity, a lot of times it's getting associated with ADHD and autism, which have now become big-time trends.
Yeah.
So if we say that one in every 4 households doesn't have 2 parents, and some studies will show that, we're saying over 10% of children are going to be diagnosed with ADHD, which is a lot. And I'm hearing a lot about autism, that it's I want to say it's really high. I don't want to say the statistic because I don't have that. I don't know if either of you do, but it's around the ADHD statistic.
Yeah. It's increased, right, with the most recent redefinition of it, looking at it as a spectrum disorder. And so, it gets a little bit more complicated. So I really don't know what the most recent statistics for that is, but I would agree with you that it has, in terms of how we're including people into that realm, has definitely increased. And I'm not saying it shouldn't, but yeah, I would say that there's probably a very large number. But what that is exactly, I'm not sure.
I'm looking for a statistic here. It's saying, according to this CDC, it's approximately 1 in 31.
Okay.
Children aged 8 years or older. That's a lot.
That's over 3%.
Yeah, and then if you go back,
out of 100, so it's
yeah, it's like skyrocketed. But there's a lot of reasons for that.
Yeah.
But still, like it's embedded in this. What are we doing with all these problems? And I think there's confusion. And so what do you think about the neurodiversity trend? Do you know anything about that?
I don't know a lot. I just know enough to probably get me into trouble where I get so far in I can't get out and I can't turn left or right. I do think that a lot of times we're very quick to be much more rigid in how we're looking at individuals and their gifts and talents that God has given them. Really aid them. And that's the thing I like about professional counseling. Like, professional counseling is looking what is normal, what is positive, wellness. What are those things? And I think when you bring up a question like that, how I look at that is for us to really look at how we're looking at things and that there are many positive things to what we're discussing, right? And I think for me, when we're looking at the brain, when we're looking at development, that we need to be much more open and understanding of the individuals that we encounter, and not be so quick to put them in a box.
Yeah. Well, the podcast is Ask Christian Counseling Associates, and I try to think of a question that people are asking. I think the question today is, what do I do with my troubled teen? How can I face this reality? And there's answers here, on which way to go. I think there is this, this trend in mental health where, hey, let's label this, and we can go from there. Let's pathologize it, and you sort of have this reaction of neurodiversity, which says, let's affirm human uniqueness, and let's reduce the stigma, and let's do this strength-based approach. I don't know if I'd really endorse that. Just my opinion. One of the things that, if you're going to be in a relationship, you have to get good at getting along. And so, you don't want to be like a cookie cutter person and be some kind of robot, but expecting people to, get along with something that is not going to work is a bad strategy. And I think that there's plenty of this going on to say, I'm going to be different for the sake of being different, and everybody has to accept it. And what you're seeing is that people are having a real tough time in that. There's this.
I just want to interject this in terms of one of the things that you're bringing me up to think about is how I've been talking about screen use, right, for adolescents and children. And a lot of times, the way that I'm presenting it is there's no positive aspects about it. And research has shown, that it builds relationships, it promotes learning. We can share screen time with children and have some fun with it. There are positives about things like that. And so using that as an example about how we're looking at things, being much more positive and trying to take a different, more positive lens to life. I don't think. I think I find myself especially within this field, of sometimes not bringing my head up to look at the overall landscape.
Yeah, I think our official position here too, and it can sound critical as we're sort of pulling things apart, but we are definitely, the official position of the podcast is it's the best of times and the worst of times. Yeah.
Well said.
So there's a positive side to technology, and then there's a side to be concerned about, and that's always the way it's going to be. Yeah. And we're trying to find a way to answer these questions. It's complex. It's not just coming down to so what do I do about my troubled teen? But I do like to simplify and reduce it, because I think when people are confused in today's society, in the best of times and worst of times, they need something to hang on to. We offer up. It's not super clinical. Although, as we have the guests on the show, we can be clinical super geeks. We have that ability, and the credentials and everything else. However, if you have, a father and a mother in the home, and they're taking care of themselves, that they can watch over you, and they're pushing you to know good things, you have significant advantages. Right. Remember those
that
three things.
That intact family. Right?
I like what you've learned from the studies. Watch out for these things. There's irritability. It can get out of hand. Sleep problems. Watch for the simple things that and respect when you see something wrong. And to me, when you bring those two worlds together, that's going to happen. And I think people ask the question. Ultimately, what do I have to do now? The things that we're working on here, sometimes don't get worked on. But do you remember Adrian von Kaum at Duquesne?
I don't.
He was gone before we were there, but he was the chair of the psychology program, and he was from Holland. I think he was there till the 80s, and then they spun off the spiritual formation program. And it was very existential phenomenology. Again, we're just going to sort of geek out here for a moment. But what they are working on is how you form your life and grow. And it's a very acceptance and commitment therapy or contextual behavioral science model where we're not going to pathologize. We're going to see like how do things go in a positive direction. There's very big themes in psychology about that, but the other thing was that there's these spheres within your life. Like there's what's immediately happening, say for one, so you can sort of start to classify like if you're always angry or if you're always sleep deprived, you can't tell what's really going on now. And then there was this infrasphere, which was like what's going on in you, which would be like more of like the anger. So you got to be concerned about that. And then there's this inner sphere, which is what's going on between you and other people. And then there was this world sphere. Like you have to, even though it's complex in the modern world, you have to really understand what's going on in the world and how you have to face that. But the most important part, and I think about my days at Duquesne University and cathedral on campus, but it was becoming, very unpopular to have the crucifixes on the walls. And what von Kamm put at the center, and us to understand, is that at the center of all of that, in this design of life, is God. So it's often a criticism of starting with Freud, all these theories that we come up with sort of place us at the center, or the importance of something else. When really, if you have that. And what radiates out from that, I believe, is those three factors. And being able to see these factors over here. If you have that at the center of your life, you have severe advantage. You just do. And they actually, were amazed by what has now become the Epiphany Association, because he passed away. And then his successor was Dr. Susan Muto. She was also at Duquesne for a long time. But that they scientifically studied, how to get that in the center of your life. And, it seems like eventually Duquesne lost interest in that. But, let's get precise about bringing these things into line in our lives and see what happens. And, and I think that the thing today when we talk about troubled youth, like to me, it always makes the impact. And this is what you're going to get here at CCA, because we will help you get precise about figuring it out. Is, Mark, your example, like you were getting very clear when you were on the paper route, and seeing like, wow, this scene in front of me is something I know I'm missing. You were getting very precise at and probably like all that time, at Western Psych, about like, man, here are these problems, and there's ways to really face this like that. And, we would lift up research like that, like with God at the center. We'll figure out what's in all these aspects of our life, these dynamics. And, it doesn't guarantee you that you're never going to have a problem or that your life is going to be perfect, but it gives you a severe advantage.
It does.
I think, my walk with the Lord, right, centers me. I'm never alone. I have direction. I transcend myself, right? There are things or impulses or whatever that I want to do, and my walk with the Lord, the Holy Spirit is guiding me and making me stand convicted at times, and my connection with others. And I think a lot of what we've talked today is that loss of connection on so many different levels. And now we're talking about our often what we see within society about that disconnectedness with God. And I think, without, for me and for others, without that walk with the Lord, there's a lot of hopelessness. What's the use? It doesn't matter. Nothing's ever going to change. Who cares? But that's not the way. That is not the walk. When we're walking with Christ, right? When we're feeling connected, we're looking at others and we're imbuing them with value, inherent value. We know that we have inherent value. We may not always treat ourselves, others, or even ourselves, with inherent value. We see any number of ways that we mistreat ourselves and we mistreat others, but we know, like, we have a hope. And I think those pieces there, that sense of community, being a part of a church, being a part of a neighborhood, family. And I think that's one of the things that you hear from us, is that yearning for family, that connection, that aspect that's much more healthier than what we've experienced very early on in life. And I just think that as we move forward, for those who have that, there's a rock to build on. There's a place. And then so when you come into Christian Counseling Associates, you're going to have somebody who's going to be able to identify and walk with you and not lean on their own wisdom, right? Yeah. All those pieces are very, very powerful. Mm-hmm. So, I think that gives us a place to start when we start to try to take, or when we're reevaluating where we're at with family, with children, or our own relationships. And, I think that that's a very important step. And,
yes, yeah. Dr. Matta, well said. Yeah. So, if we ask the question today, how do I deal with my troubled teen? Mm-hmm. Let's start with, reestablishing faith, hope, and love, first in Jesus Christ, and then putting relationships around us. Yeah. And let's reestablish the purpose in our life, the center of our life. And then some of us are going to have to get precise. Yeah. And a counselor can help you. You come to CCA, you're going to get that precision from people like Dr. Matta and Mark Britton. But we value our connection to Geneva. You teach precision. Mm-hmm. And Mark, your experiences and your expertise bring about precision. So I hope that the folks will find an answer to their question. As they're dealing with some pretty big challenges sometimes. But Dr. Matta, we have a tradition here, being a first-time guest, that you would offer up a prayer for everyone who is dealing with that kind of trouble. And let me have you say a prayer for us.
Absolutely. Dear Lord, we really thank you for the opportunity to gather this day. In your word, it says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm with you. We know today you're with us. And Lord, we just ask a special blessing for those out there that are struggling to try to navigate their way in terms of trying to steer families or children, adolescents in the right direction, trying to take on all the challenges that they confront on a daily basis. Lord, many are feeling overwhelmed, but there are people out there, Lord, that you have help to shepherd along and to place them in a path that could be reached. And Lord, we know that we're never alone with you. Lord, we just thank you for the blessings of this day, for one another, and we ask that we continue to build up. And in your word, it says, the work is much, the workers are few. May we continue to increase those who not only are looking to promote counseling and mental health, but also those who are walking with you. And these things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Dr. James Matta from Geneva, Mark Britton from CCA. Thanks, guys, for being with us today. Folks, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.